Yeah, Brian just commented on dressed like a Vermonter. It was about 20 years ago that I was in Italy, and I was driving on the Autostrada, which is the interstate between Milan and Modena, Reggio Emilia. I don't know if you know, but this was in the wintertime, and it was in the Po Valley. The Po Valley gets dense fog and patchy fog, and guess what? It was that night, and it's Italy, which means they have Italian drivers. These guys are insane. So normally, the traffic is going 90 miles an hour, a few faster, but they've slowed down to 80 with the patchy fog and dense fog. And yeah, they've got that bright red light that European cars have on the back for fog, but that really doesn't matter much when you go into a dense fog you can't see at 90 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour. So I'm thinking, wow, this is kind of crazy here. You know, I could die tonight. When I go into dense fog, do I just drive off in the field, protect myself, and stay alive? You know, get it far away from the hospital? And then I'm also thinking, or I could be in a bad accident and I could be paralyzed. Well, that's somehow triggered something in the designer in me, the stylist in me, and started saying, hey, what would I do if I was paralyzed? I have over 2 miles of trails on my property in Vermont, and I like to be outdoors. Nature's a big thing. It's part of how I get creativity and kind of clear my mind. And so I started sketching, and of course, being a mechanical engineer and a designer, that's what I do for companies, so I treat it the same, but I get to sit in a lot of cafes, and I'm traveling between different clients and places, so over the time I would sketch out what I would think I would make for myself and put these in my briefcase. And then fast forward a couple of years, and I started thinking, okay, I should do something with this. I initiated some focus groups with people who were in wheelchairs, because obviously they're going to think different than I do. I'm trying to put myself in that position, but they are in it every day. And I started to learn that eye level most of the time during the day is a big thing for them. That being secure around cars and trucks out on the street is a very big thing. We've all seen the electric scooter with the little flag up going down the side of the road, and we know how dangerous that looks. And also the big thing that jumped out was the statement this lady in Philadelphia made, was she says, I want to go to Pizza Hut as fast as everybody else. And the reason she said it was because her friends would call and say, do you want to go to Pizza Hut with me? And she would say no. She meant yes, but she said no. Because she in her mind is going, oh, okay, they're going to have to help me get downstairs, I have to get in the van, and that's going to be, oh, it's embarrassing, and they just want to go get pizza, so she said no. And then after this happens a couple of times, they don't ask anymore, and of course it's a negative downward spiral. She's depressed, and so the whole point became, we really need to have no transfer. I can get there the same as they can. So I started incorporating these into the design work, what we're doing, and then I later made a prototype. I was kind of at a period in my career where I was getting frustrated a little bit with bigger clients that was starting just to be styling for styling's sake. And I'm an R&D guy, I like to invent stuff. So I just broke off some major contracts and said I want to do more R&D stuff, and I want to focus on this project more, and also pick up some other R&D projects with John Deere. So I started doing that, and then initiated more customer clinics with the prototype and with people who were over 80. Because during that time I realized a lot of people who are disabled are actually older. There's 12 million people with walkers and canes. And so in the clinics, guess what they wanted? They wanted to be more able to be independent, out in the, out off of the couch, take their couch up to the park. So effectively, one of the vehicles they have basically is a Barco Lounger with 22-inch rims and 20 tires, right? And so, but in that we start putting together, and what I start realizing, and particularly with the paralyzed veterans and some of the other people, is mobility is more than mobility. It's psychology, it's independence, and it's wellness because of the impact of getting out and about. And so they did that. Another thing occurred in a flight to Vermont. I was sitting next to a professor from Purdue, and we were talking about innovation, and she asked, oh, would you happen to have an idea for and she was in landscape architecture, and she said, would you happen to have an idea for a project for our master's program in landscape architecture? And I said, I do. The year before I had met Dean Kamen, and we were talking about his iBot that goes upstairs, and he had invented the Segway, and that was just at that time, right when they're coming out. And I said, and he'd explained that, good point, that it's interesting to have a 80-pound vehicle carrying a 160-pound vehicle versus a 5,000-pound vehicle carrying a 80-pound person. And it stuck in my mind, energy effectiveness and the same thing. But I also noted, we're talking about this while I'm helping him load it into the back of his Hummer. So he still was being driven by psychology and security and protection. So these things kind of add up over time. And to this lady, I said, I would like to see what the Segway, what would happen in the loop in Chicago if you designed for the Segway, because the Segway doesn't really have, it's either on the road or the sidewalks, it's really in neither place, as is happening even today with the e-scooter. They're throwing them out there, but is it really, how's it happen? And guess what? She did this with her students, and 8 months later I was invited to an open house in Chicago at a gallery, much like this, and the students had done a beautiful job of doing illustrations of what the past transportation was, what the present transportation was, with Segways injected into it. And then also over here, a beautiful display of their ideas of what would the architecture in the parks and landscape be if they had Segways you designed for them. And what stood out was that they had created a causeway at the second floor that went around through the buildings, and you could go from your parking lot to the metro, to different places and get on this causeway. And the biggest thing that stood out is they had incorporated and thought that we can put in fresh food, farmers markets, in small shops, because you're not in a car. You're on a little Segway. I can go point to point and get my broccoli, I can get my fresh meats, I can do this and really replicate what's happened in Europe in the old days when you went, I lived 6 years in Belgium one time, so yeah, I'd go to the little shops and get my fresh meats, and you'd eat healthy, and you're actually eating local. And so I thought that was a novel thing, because here these students had looked at it more holistically. They had stepped outside being a Segway designer and looked at architecture and a city urban landscape designer. And that stuck in my mind to say, somewhat of what I'm finding, there's more to it than the technical design, that mobility is more than mobility. Now, fast forward a little further, I got sidetracked, working on some defense programs relative to this, thinking that could get some capital. It's a capital-intensive thing to make vehicles. And thinking I could get some capital that way, but then I found out shortly that when you're doing transformation and innovation in defense, those don't really go together, because disruptive isn't good for the defense acquisition system. That was a painful thing to learn. That cost me some money. But anyway, what I gained, though, was all the technology that's happening there that's integrated into what's going to happen in the future. And as you look forward further now, as time's gone by further, and I then went on to trying to find an innovation ecosystem around the country to play out, and I help you, you help me, we'll do this bigger study and get more things happening. And that took me to quite a number of places, to Texas, and I was here earlier, and Detroit, where I have a lot of resources, and Arizona, and Case Western, and MIT, and Boston, and Rensselaer, and Albany, and trying to study this. And as I am with these cities, now I'm seeing a lot of these cities have this urban renewal, but they have a lot of economic disparity. They have a lot of what Rich was talking about, hunger. They have a lot of poverty in wealth. They have a lot of rebirth. And I'm looking at it saying, mobility is more than mobility. How is this future going to play? And it's starting to play, as you see with e-scooters. But again, the opportunity is to look further. So in that, last November, I'm in Vermont. It's starting to get cold. The snow flurries coming down. Of course, that happened in October. But the point is, I'm realizing, God, I've got some projects I just got to get on making a company, skip trying to do the big picture thing, and let's just pick a place. I got to pick a place. And of course, my mind there, I pulled out my sheet of all these cities and universities and all the objectives of technologies, advanced manufacturing, logistics, and university strengths. And I was surprised that Dayton has pretty strong stars on there. Why was I surprised? Because it was November and my mind was on Tucson and Texas. You know? So, but I went to Detroit for a meeting, and I said, I'm close, I'll pop down to Dayton. And I popped down to Dayton and met with Eric Collins again, and he gave me a pep talk again on the rejuvenation of downtown, and momentum was happening, and it was really impressive. And so I know Dayton a little bit, but I also went to the Carillon Museum and the Heritage Park behind it, which I did not know was there. And in there is the Barn Gang stable. And if you don't know, that's where Edward Deeds, who was the head of NCR, who had the innovation team, put 4 guys in this barn to solve the problems of automotive. And what his view was in 1910 was that automotive is going to happen. It was a rich man's game, but it's going to happen. And so he basically said, "Boom, this is a gold mine. Let's put a little dam." This is a quote. "Let's put a little dam and put a sluice in there and get some of this gold." So what he did is he took his guys, inventors from the inventor group at NCR, and put them in this stable behind his house. We didn't have a horse anymore, and said, "Look at the whole industry and solve their problems. Look at the problems." And they partnered with Cadillac and developed a self-starter. They did a better ignition system. They made Delco, sold that to GM. They invented other brakes. It really, to me, is the same thing I'm looking at now. That mobility is going to change, and it's going to be big. How do you tap into that? And the point being is, when I looked at Dayton as a whole, coming back to, okay, man, if it's Dayton, what's Dayton? Dayton's got a great DNA for innovation. And what you find is it's more than just Wright brothers. It's really deep. And the whole NCR looking socially at their wellness situation. And so my point was, with the universities and how much technology is around this 2-hour drive circle, and the logistics point in the country, I said, let's plant myself in Dayton. We'll start my tech companies and kind of startups with a number of people from the universities. And if the other happens, it's as good a place as anywhere in the country to do innovation in what's coming in the future of light mobility. Thanks.